Well, this project did not go as planned. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is a pair of fluted nightstands or end tables that I found on Facebook Marketplace for $100. They are basically in really good shape. One of them has a little bit of a hot pink paint on top, but they're really dark. I want to lighten them up and give them a whole new look. Alright, let's get to work by removing the hardware and giving it a good clean. I am using Simple Green's all-purpose cleaner and degreaser in a diluted formula. You don't have to use this brand. I also used Crud Cutter, White Lightning, TSP, just whatever cleaner I have on hand. These pieces aren't super dirty, so I'm just spraying them down liberally with my cleaner and then wiping them with a paper towel. And then I rinse the pieces with a damp cloth to remove any remaining cleaner left behind. My original idea is to lighten these pieces up a lot and to add new legs. With the legs that I ordered off Amazon, I thought the little piece hanging down in the middle between the legs would look weird with the new ones. So I grabbed a flathead screwdriver and my hammer and pried those pieces off. And of course, in the process, I damaged the piece a little bit. So I grabbed my quick wood epoxy, mixed it together till it was one solid color, and then molded it and formed it into the area where I caused some damage and let that dry. Once it was fully dried, I grabbed some 180 grit sandpaper and sanded it smooth until the surface was nice and flush. There were a few other scratches and dings over the piece that I used the epoxy in. In order to prepare the surface for primer, I am using one of my sanding pads from my Surf Prep sander in the fine grit. I lightly go over the surface to give it a scuff sand. Scuff sand means to not remove the previous finish. I'm just making little microscopic marks into the finish to give a better surface for my primer to adhere to. You can see the dustiness on the pieces from my scuff sanding, which happens whenever you are doing a dark piece. Obviously, if you're doing a white or light piece, you're not gonna see that powder. After scuff sanding, I like to use my feather duster to remove the large amount of dust, and then I go back over the piece with a lint-free cloth to remove any remaining dust residue. I forgot to mention that the cloth that I use is damp. For those of you new to flipping furniture, I run a lint-free cloth underneath my tap water, wring it out really good, and then go over the piece. So if you're new to the channel, I paint furniture full-time for a living. So if paint and furniture is not your thing, you're not in the right place. If you like that sort of thing, you definitely are. If you haven't already, go ahead and like, subscribe, and hit the bell. For primer, I am using Zinsser's Shellac Base Primer. The shellac separates from it, so you have to definitely stir it each time before use until it's completely blended. If you saw my video from last week, you know that typically I use this same formula in a spray can, but I had to commit to buying a gallon. So for the next few videos, you'll probably, whenever I am using this shellac base primer on my dark stained wood pieces, you will probably see me apply it with a roller. Last time I used a microfiber roller and it left chunks of fabric in. So this time I am trying a foam roller, which ends up being a mistake. Shellac-based products dry a lot faster than water-based. So you want to get the product on there and then go back over it quickly so the strokes or marks go one direction and then leave it be. I found between using the microfiber roller last week and then the foam roller this week that I was correct. The foam roller actually leaves less marks behind than the microfiber roller, which is why I was originally wanting to try it. So that's why later in the video you see me using a fine grit sanding sponge to sand between coats of primer instead of the 150 grit like I used last week. On the areas that the roller could not reach, I use a chip brush to get those. A disposable foam roller and a chip brush make for easy cleanup. When I go to apply the primer to the second nightstand is where I noticed that shellac eats foam, so foam rollers are not a good option for shellac-based products. Now I understand why everyone always uses microfiber rollers when applying shellac primer. Originally, I tried to leave the doors on the piece, but the primer kind of poured into the creases around the doors. So I decided to go ahead and remove those for easier access to paint and have a better finish look overall. In normal weather conditions, this product takes about 30 minutes to dry. So I grabbed a fine grit sanding sponge, lightly went over the prime surface, and then went back over it with a lint-free cloth that was dry this time to remove any dust residue. I then applied a second thin coat of primer. And yes, you can teach an old dog new tricks because here I am using a microfiber roller instead of the foam one that disintegrated on me. I let the second coat of primer dry for 30 minutes and then came back with that fine grit sanding sponge, which I will link down below for you. Lightly went over the prime surfaces and then went back over it with a lint-free cloth to remove any dust residue. Today I'm trying out some new products. This is vintage paint in French beige. I found this paint at a boutique in my metro area where I actually have my own furniture booth and sell my furniture out of. So if you are local to Oklahoma City, USA and find yourself fond of this color and paint, it is available at the Feather Nest Market in War Acres. For those of you new to painting, thin coats is always the way to go. I dip my brush about an inch into the paint, wipe off the backside across the edge of the top of the can, and then that's the amount of paint that I work with. Now this is a chalk-based paint. It actually reminds me very much of Annie Sloan chalk paint, so if you're familiar with that product, I do use a spritzer to spray on the piece and also spray on my brush to help thin out the paint. It makes it go on smoother and gives you that less brush stroke look. This is where I'm paying attention to going around the edges so hard I forget about my left hand and drop my paint can. No. In the original audio, I actually screamed when I dropped my painted can. But what did I do? Yeah, this can was $38 for that little jar of paint. So I don't want to hear the cross-contamination comments. I know what I'm doing is probably not the best thing, but it was $38 and I was not going to waste all that paint. I saved it and I scooped it back into the can, and I am not ashamed. So not only does this paint have Annie Sloan feel and works like Annie Sloan chalk paint, but it has Annie Sloan chalk paint prices as well. I let the first coat of paint dry for 2 hours, and then I came back with that fine grit sanding sponge, lightly went over the entire painted surface, and then wiped it free with a lint-free cloth of any dust residue. I then repeated that whole process again. I went over, added a second thin coat of paint, let it dry for 2 hours, lightly sanded the surface, and then wiped it free of any dust residue with a lint-free cloth. For protection, I am using vintage paint wax in clear. If you've watched my channel before, you know that I like to use a similar color of t-shirt piece. So it's a light paint, light t-shirt piece, dark paint, dark t-shirt piece to apply my wax. A wax brush is also fine for application. Using the t-shirt is just my preference choice. I actually really like this wax, and I'm a big fan of it. Some waxes can be tacky and you have to work really hard to work into the painted surface, but this went on very smoothly. You let it set for 30 minutes and then come back with a t-shirt piece and buff it. And I did that process all over again, applied the wax, let it set for 30 minutes, and then buffed it. The wax not only protects your painted surface, it also makes it water repellent, which is really important for nightstands and end tables in my opinion. All right, let's put this piece back together. So I put the inner shelf in first and then attach the doors back onto the nightstands, end tables, whatever they're going to be used for. All right, when I added the doors back on, I noticed that the inside of the doors did not have a nice crisp paint line. So I went ahead and taped those off with some painter's tape and then painted the inside. I did 2 coats of paint and then waxed it as well to give it a nice crisp line on the inside. I then flipped the piece over to remove the original feet. I ordered some natural wood bunt feet off Amazon that had to be drilled and screwed in to be attached securely. I really do like these feet, so I will put a link down below in the description. So after attaching all the feet on one nightstand, I decided that I didn't really like them and they were a little too small for how big the nightstand or end table was. So I removed those and then attached back on the original feet. Don't you love it when you cause extra work for yourself? right, once everything was attached back again, I scuff sanded, dusted, painted a couple coats of paint, and also waxed the feet as well. I know, I should have just left the original feet on, but sometimes, you know, you have an idea on your head and you don't know it's not going to work until you actually see it. All right, so after everything was painted and protected, it's time to add some new hardware. The original hardware that came were silver. I didn't want to spend any extra time on painting it gold, so I had some free knobs from an old kitchen remodel that I applied to these nightstands. Here's a quick reminder of our before and our after. I hope you guys loved this set just as much as I do. Lightening up the piece and adding new hardware just really gave it a whole new look. These nightstands or end tables sold within an hour being posted. I sold them for $360, paid $100, spent $25 in materials, so that's $235 in profit. 5 hours of labor is $47 an hour. Of course, if I would have stuck with the original legs, I could have spent less time on these and made even more per hour. Thank you all so much for watching until the very end. As always, until next time.